In today's video, I want to take a look at a few games that I feel are a good fit for AMD Fluid Motion Frames 2. The idea for this video was partially influenced by a comment I got on my AFMF2 video I did the other day. I'll link that below. That AFMF can actually work better in some games than others, where its flaws can be more in your face. And there's definitely truth and validity to that because I've noticed it myself. So that's why I put this video together with some games where I feel it actually makes sense. And we're going to look at a diverse group of games. So without further ado, let's fly straight into it. We're going to begin with Microsoft Flight Simulator, one of my all-time favorites. This game is actually very demanding, also very CPU demanding, which means that even if you had the best PC hardware today, it can be difficult to even maintain 60 in some of the more crowded cities if you fly low like this. So it's a perfect candidate for AFMF. There's also no FSR3 frame generation. While there is DLSS3 frame generation, they haven't yet updated it for FSR3, which is unfortunate. But also, there is no rapid camera movement. It's sort of like a focused camera angle. You move forward. That makes AFMF run a bit better in my opinion, because where it begins to break apart is mostly in third person or first person games where there is rapid camera movements. I did a video on this a few days ago. If you're interested, you can take a look at that, where I point out how the flaws can basically can introduce a bit of garbling and hitching when you move the camera around. But in this game, however, that is very difficult to notice because of the camera angle perspective. So in my opinion, this is one of the best candidates. So what I've done here is I've locked the FPS to 60, and I have to say that even at 60 FPS, a game like this is perfectly playable, but we can make it more fluid by enabling AFMF. So why don't we go ahead and do that right now. Okay, now we've enabled AFMF, and as you can see, we're at like 90 FPS, which means that we dropped to like 40 FPS for a second there, making that transition. But now we're able to get around 100, 120 image fluidity. Now the game, it feels fine actually, latency wise. We've added about 10 milliseconds of latency according to the AMD overlay anyway. There's no way for me to test that. I don't really have the equipment to test latency, but I've said it before that I'm not a sweaty multiplayer type of person. So for me, FSR3, DLSS3 frame generation, even AFMF feel okay in latency with the games that I personally play. So this feels fine in that regard to me anyway, but the image is definitely more fluid than it was without AFMF enabled. Now we're going to take a closer look and examine the frames in slower motion just so that I can portray to you, the viewer, how it looks, because YouTube format is 60 FPS, right? Okay, so check this out. I've slowed the footage down to 50% because the AFMF side on the right has been captured at 120 FPS. So now you, the viewer, should be able to see the difference in fluidity clearly. Whereas at 100%, you're not going to be able to see it because both would be shown at 60 FPS through YouTube, because that's what YouTube supports. But here you can clearly see how much more fluid the image looks with AFMF enabled, right? And even though the AFMF generated frames are of lower quality compared to FSR3 or DLSS3, that can introduce some blurring, which we're going to look at a bit closely. In this game, in this case, it's like it almost works in its favor, just because of the type of game it is and how fast we're going. We're going faster than the speed of sound, for goodness sake. And yeah, I have to say that turning AFMF on in this game actually makes a lot of sense, because even if you had extremely powerful hardware, it'd be tough to maintain above 60 when you're flying low in crowded cities like this. If you're flying very high, it's fine. You know, you'll get 60, no problem, even with weaker hardware. But yeah, in this particular case, I'd say AFMF works really well in a scenario like this. Now, if we were to slow down the footage even more to 25%, you can see on the AFMF side, you can almost pick up on all the generated frames because they almost like don't fully align with the real ones. You know, it's almost like I call it slurred vision. I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but I guess use your imagination. It's almost like there's two images that are not identical, sort of blending together almost unnaturally. But again, I mean, I'm slowing it down for you so that you can kind of see the imperfections of frame generation, like here at the bottom right corner there. But at 100% speed, Those imperfections are very hard to pick up on, and I would say they most definitely make up for the increase in motion fluidity in a game like this. The next game I want to take a look at was Forza Motorsport. Now, I've done AFMF videos previously looking at the tech, and I've always felt that it just impacted image quality a bit too much. But one game where I felt it actually worked pretty good was Forza Motorsport. So that's why I wanted to highlight that here and take another look at it on AFMF too. Now, if you think about it, this game is not really all that different from Microsoft Flight Simulator, right? It's a similar camera motion, forward-facing, it's a fast-paced game, and it's also a quite demanding game, actually, especially if you enable ray tracing. It can be not only GPU intensive, but also CPU intensive. The game also doesn't natively support FSR3 or DLSS3 frame generation, which makes AFMF quite interesting in this particular case. Now at 60 FPS for a racing game, that's actually the bare minimum. You would ideally want better fluidity and especially more responsiveness, I guess. Although AFMF is not really going to help us in that regard. But let's go ahead and check out the fluidity because that's what it's designed for. We've slowed down the playback speed by 50%, so now you guys should be able to see how much better the motion fluidity is with AFMF2 on the right side. And like Microsoft Flight Simulator, I feel this type of technology kind of has an advantage in this type of game, where you go very fast, there is no rapid camera movement. As a matter of fact, the only times I could pick up that AFMF was on that I felt a little bit of blurring and instability was sort of introduced was when you make these sharp turns. That you can see things kind of get a bit blurry here and there. That's really the only time, but overall, the game definitely feels more fluid, looks more fluid with AFMF on versus running at 60 FPS. Now, if you had a high refresh rate monitor like 175 Hertz or especially 240 Hertz, if you're getting 120 FPS already, you could turn on AFMF and then max out your monitor's refresh rate. I think this type of technology works best in that type of scenario, although that type of scenario would be very difficult, if not impossible, to show you guys on YouTube, basically. Now, if we were to go ahead and slow the footage down to 25%, on the right, when you make these sharp turns, the flaws can be seen a bit more clearly. It's just the overall quality of those generated frames can have quite a bit of blurring whenever there's rapid camera changes. As you can see, if you look at the signs and the posts, you can see they're almost like doubling up and garbling up a little bit. But overall, I would say while you're playing at 100% speed, that is very difficult to notice, especially if you use motion blur, for example, which I feel it can actually look all right in racing game. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan, although per pixel motion blur can look all right. But anyway, yeah, I think for Forza Motorsport, AFMF actually works pretty well because it's a demanding game to begin with, and there is no other frame generation technology for it. Next, we're going to look at Star Citizen, and I'm probably going to make a separate video in the future looking at this game a bit more in depth because here I actually couldn't lock the FPS with MSI Afterburner. The game would not launch after a crash with MSI Afterburner anymore for some reason. I tried Radeon Chill, that didn't work either. That's why the frame rate is variable. This is at 1440p, not with maxed out settings, but pretty close. It's on high preset, and we're getting around 87 FPS. The game is not actually crazy demanding when you're flying. Now, in the cities, like New Babbage, it's extremely CPU intensive, and the servers can be a bit messy. But if we were to enable AFMF on, we're able to easily double our FPS, and it actually looks pretty good. I was actually playing this on 175 Hertz display, and I immediately picked up on the improved motion fluidity with AFMF on in this particular case. Now, the flaws can stand out a bit, mostly in the UI if you're playing with the first-person mode camera. But for the most part, it actually works pretty good. And in outer space, it actually works really well as well, AFMF. It does pretty good. But what about New Babbage? That's the main big city in Star Citizen. Let's take a look at that briefly because it's a bit messy, that one. But I felt like I had to try it because Star Citizen is a crazy demanding game, actually, CPU-wise. After you wake up in the apartment for the very first time and make your way down to the lobby, the game can actually be played in first person or third person. There's actually two third person cameras, one that's a bit up closer, this is a bit farther away, and it actually does benefit from AFMF for sure. The only problem is that this game can be so CPU intensive in New Babbage, in this big area, that there's very frequent hitches and FPS drops. But where it is 60, you can clearly see that AFMF does offer an improvement in visual fluidity, as you expect it to, of course. Now, is there flaws? Yes. And by the way, I was actually able to cap the FPS to 60 by using VSync this time. But as far as the flaws, basically frequent camera movements, like if you look from left to right, can introduce some of that jitter, just because of the quality of the generated frames can vary a bit from, the native ones. But overall, though, I do find it to be quite a bit of an improvement for a game like this that is, I mean, even natively with some of the best hardware, you're going to have some performance issues and hitches. So I think AFMF is actually a very, very interesting and valuable tool for a game like this. Absolutely. Now, unrelated to AFMF, if you've never checked out Star Citizen, I suggest checking it out. Despite the flaws, there's actually quite a bit of game here to enjoy. Actually, it's a very unique game. It's a persistent universe. It's huge MMO. Very, very nice people. I actually had a few people help me out a lot in this game. One person gave me a bunch of credits to buy a ship because I kept crashing my ship. I destroyed my ship mostly because of bugs, but the game has actually improved. They've added the tutorial part of the game is actually much improved. They improved the user interface. It's actually in a better playable state than it was last time. I looked at it about a year ago. Still far away from it being complete, don't get me wrong. We'll go ahead and wrap up Star Citizen for now with this clip with AFMF on the right, where you can clearly see that the visual fluidity is definitely improved, although there is hitches that happen in the game naturally because it's New Babbage and the servers, especially last night, were very overloaded. I've seen messages of people in the general chat complaining about server stability and issues. As a matter of fact, while I was trying to capture footage for this game, I actually fell through the elevator trying to go down to the lobby. It was terrible. Now, this is another game where I feel AFMF actually works pretty good, and that is No Rest for the Wicked. It's sort of like a Souls-like ARPG type of game by the makers of Ori and the Blind Forest, I believe. Very good game, actually. Very interesting game. And this sort of genre sort of works well with AFMF as well. So could be Diablo, World of Warcraft maybe. I'm actually going to try to test World of Warcraft with the new upcoming expansion. Strategy games, I can see those working well with AFMF as well, just because of the fixed camera angle. The flaws are actually very difficult to detect while you're playing, absolutely. I mean, I didn't really notice much flaws playing this game for the sake of this video. So yeah, I think this is another genre of game where AFMF works quite well. And No Rest for the Wicked specifically, it's actually quite a demanding game, believe it or not. Even though I may not look it, it actually is. So AFMF is a pretty good tool to use for games like this if you needed that extra fluidity, be it because you have a high refresh rate monitor or weaker hardware, whatever the case might be. I think as long as you have a 60 FPS base, AFMF will double that, and you get a nice boost to visual fluidity without much of a compromise to image quality. Actually, as you can clearly see here, I'll go ahead and slow the footage to 25% and see if we can pick up on any flaws like we did on the other games, actually, which were somewhat easy to pick up on. Here, I think it's a bit more difficult to. Now, to be completely fair and to share my personal opinion, the game like this, I think 60 FPS is more than plenty for me personally. But again, I don't really notice much image quality degradation at all. Actually, with AFMF, I think it actually works really well because this game actually they use a very interesting form of motion blur. I remember Digital Foundry talking about it, but it actually looks quite nice. I've actually left that enabled here, and that probably masks some of the AFMF's own, shortcomings, I think. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. I did want to show some games where AFMF, I believe, actually works pretty well. I think the weakest one was probably Star Citizen, but that game needs all the help it can get. So, it's one of those games where you're willing to make a few compromises for the sake of better image fluidity, I would say. So I think that was probably the weakest game for AFMF in this collection of games I chose for this video. Now, I was going to show another game, which was actually Hi-Fi Rush, but I just don't want this video to be too long. And I do plan on diving a bit deeper into Star Citizen because it's a very interesting game, and they've improved it a bit too. So it's something I find interesting. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my selection of games, or do you have any other games that you've tried where you felt AFMF worked well? Again, ARPGs, strategy games, I think those are probably the best type of games for this type of technology in the current state that it's in. But that'll be it for this video, guys. If you did like it, give it a like. I'd highly appreciate that. Consider subscribing if you want to see more similar content. And I hope you all have a great rest of the weekend. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.